There were empty seats in the family row. I noticed them the way you notice everything at a funeral for your child, with a kind of terrible clarity, where every detail burns in and stays. The white lilies on the casket. The way the funeral director spoke too softly. The school friends in the third pew, who didn't know how to sit still and kept looking at each other with frightened eyes because they were 11 and 12 years old, and this was the first time death had entered their actual world. And the empty seats. My parents were not there. My sister Brielle was not there. Because Brielle had a cake tasting that afternoon for her wedding, and the venue had a strict cancellation policy, and my mother said they couldn't reschedule, and my father said he was sorry, but you know how your mother gets, and I stood at my daughter's graveside with my brother-in-law holding my elbow because my knees kept wanting to give out, and the empty seats in the family row were the image I brought home with me that evening and have not been able to put down since. My daughter Lila was 12 years old. She had been sick for 3 years, a diagnosis that came right before her 9th birthday and that we fought with everything we had, every specialist, every clinical trial, every morning where I woke up and made the decision again that we were going to keep going, because that was the only option I would allow myself. She had curly red hair that she was very particular about and opinions about which conditioner was acceptable. She liked documentaries about animals and competitive baking shows, and a specific brand of raspberry lip balm that I ordered in bulk because she went through it fast, and it made her feel like herself during the hard weeks. She used to say the lip balm was medicinal, and then smile at her own joke. She was funny in the quiet, dry way of certain kids who've spent too much time around adults and have learned to observe before they speak, and sometimes to say the one thing that puts everything exactly right. She died on a Tuesday in October. I was holding her hand. Tell me where you're watching from if you've ever had to be strong for someone while your heart was breaking completely. Because that's what 3 years looked like. My parents had not been present for most of it either. That's the part that I had been carrying quietly alongside the grief of Lila's illness, the awareness that the people who should have been in the waiting rooms weren't always there. My mother came to the hospital 4 times in 3 years. 4 times in 36 months of this. My father came twice, both times briefly, both times with the energy of someone waiting for permission to leave. Brielle had come once, early on, and had spent most of the visit talking about a vacation she and her boyfriend were planning, and Lila had looked at me after she left with the expression kids make when they've understood something they didn't need to understand yet. Brielle got engaged 14 months before Lila died. The engagement was announced at a family dinner that happened to fall on the same weekend as one of Lila's harder stretches, and I had stayed home with her while the family gathered at my parents' house, and my mother called to tell me the news in the quick, bright way of someone who wants you to know they're happy and isn't particularly interested in how you're doing. The wedding was set for March. Lila died in October. The cake tasting was in October. My parents called 3 days after the funeral. 3 days. Lila's bedroom still smelled like her. The raspberry lip balm was still on the nightstand. Her school backpack was still by the stairs because I hadn't been able to move it, hadn't been able to touch anything that was placed the way she had placed it, because changing the placement meant something I wasn't ready to accept. I was sitting at my kitchen table drinking coffee. I wasn't tasting when my phone rang, and it was my mother's name on the screen. I answered because you do. Because 30 years of conditioning says you answer when your mother calls, and because there was still some part of me, the part that keeps hoping even when hoping has repeatedly proven to be a bad investment, that thought maybe she was calling to say she was sorry. She was not calling to say she was sorry. "We wanted to check on you," she said. Her voice had the careful brightness of someone who is doing the minimum required to open a conversation they've planned. I said I was managing. There was a pause, and then she said, "We also wanted to talk to you about Lila's trust." I set my coffee down. Honestly, what would you have done after that phone call? Because I want to hear in the comments, because what came next was something I could not have prepared for. My late husband had established a trust for Lila when she was born. When he passed 4 years ago, that trust was restructured, and the terms were specific and deliberate, drawn up with the help of our estate attorney, Nolan Pierce, a man I had worked with for years and who knew the full picture of what Lila's illness had cost us financially and what she had wanted for the money that remained after she was gone. Lila had, at 11 years old, when we had an honest conversation about what might happen, the kind of conversation no parent should have to have, but that some of us do, told me she wanted some of it to go to the pediatric ward where she'd been treated. She said, and I remember this exactly, "The other kids there don't always have stuff to do. Can we fix that?" We put it in writing. Nolan had it documented. Lila's words, in a letter she dictated, attached to the trust. The trust totaled $950,000. It was not an accident. It was what remained of her father's life insurance, carefully preserved through 4 years of medical costs by choices that cost me a great deal. It was hers. It was now mine to execute according to her wishes. My mother, on the phone 3 days after the funeral, said, "Brielle's wedding costs have gotten a little out of hand. We thought, given everything, that Lila would have wanted the family taken care of." I said nothing. "It's selfish to let that kind of money sit there," my mother said. "Your sister deserves one good day." I told her I needed to think about it, and I ended the call. Then I called Nolan. It was late in the afternoon, and I wasn't sure he'd pick up, but he answered on the third ring, and I said I needed to talk to him about the trust, and something in my voice must have told him the full shape of the situation because he said, "Tell me everything," and waited. He listened to everything without interrupting, which is one of the things I have always appreciated about him. When I finished, he said, "They can't touch it. The trust terms are specific. Charitable distribution, as outlined in the attached documentation from Lila, takes priority over any personal claims. There is no legal mechanism by which family members can petition for discretionary spending from a charitable trust." My mother suggested Lila would have wanted this. Nolan was quiet for a moment. Lila's wishes are documented and witnessed. Her letter is attached to the trust. That is the legal record of what she wanted. Your mother's interpretation carries no legal weight. I wrote that down. Those exact words. I kept the note on my phone. The calls continued for 2 weeks. My mother, my father once, Brielle twice. Brielle's calls were the hardest, not because I was sympathetic, but because she was brazen in a way that was almost impressive. She said things like, "I know the timing is bad, and I wouldn't ask if we weren't desperate," and in the second call, "You always had more than me anyway." As though Lila's illness had been a financial advantage. As though the years of medical debt and the hours in hospital rooms and the specific grief of watching a child fight for her life were a form of abundance. I did not scream at her. I want to be honest about that. Not because I'm particularly virtuous, but because I was too tired for screaming and because I understood that nothing I said was going to change who Brielle was or who my parents had always been. This was not new behavior. This was the same family that had left empty seats in the family row. I was just finally without the fog of hoping they'd eventually become different. Subscribe if you believe some betrayals should never be forgiven. Because what happened next was the conversation that ended something. My mother called one final time, and she made the mistake of saying, "After everything we've done for you." She said it in the voice she uses when she needs me to feel the weight of obligation, the voice that has worked on me in various ways since I was small enough to need things from her. "You missed her funeral," I said. "Mallory. You missed my daughter's funeral. You were at a cake tasting." My voice was very quiet. It surprises me to remember that. I had expected myself to be louder. "Don't you ever say you did anything for my daughter. You weren't there for 3 years of her being sick, and you weren't there the day we buried her. So don't." The silence that followed was the longest one I can remember from her. I hung up. I have not called back. Nolan and I met in person the following week, and we began the process of executing the trust according to Lila's wishes. The pediatric ward at Hartwell Children's Hospital received the first distribution, enough to fund a dedicated activity room for long-term patients, the kind of room where kids who are spending months of their lives inside a hospital have somewhere to go that doesn't feel like a hospital. They put a small plaque on the wall. It has Lila's name on it. The rest went to a pediatric grief foundation and a scholarship fund for children with serious illness, both organizations Lila had asked about in her letter. She was 12 years old, and she was thinking about other kids. That was who she was. Brielle's wedding took place in March. I know this because my aunt sent me a photo without comment, the way she does things. It was smaller than planned, significantly smaller from what I gathered. The venue was downgraded, the guest list cut, some of the vendors apparently fell through. I don't know the details, and I don't want them. I hope Brielle was happy on her day. I genuinely mean that, which surprises me sometimes. What I could not give her was my daughter's money. What I could not give my parents was a version of me that kept absorbing things that cost me everything. Those were the only two things they were asking for. That evening after Nolan and I finished, I went to Lila's room. I sit in there sometimes. I know some people say you shouldn't, that you should eventually put things away, rearrange, let yourself forward. Maybe. But right now her room is the place where I can still be the mother of a living child, in some sense. Where her particular smell is still in the blanket I keep on the chair. Where the documentaries she loved are still in the watch list. Where the specific texture of who she was is still present if I sit quietly and let it be. She left me a letter. She dictated it to me the same session she did the trust letter, but this one was private, not for the lawyer, not for documentation, just for me. I've read it more times than I can count. I'm not going to share all of it. But she said, in her particular 12-year-old way, "Mom, don't let anyone take my stuff and use it wrong. You'll know what wrong looks like." She trusted me to know. I knew. Protecting my daughter didn't end when she died. That was the first thing they never understood, and maybe the last thing that was ever really mine to do for her. They skipped her funeral to plan a party. Then they called wondering why I stopped answering. Some questions answer themselves.